expect to briefly learn what is Microsoft Graph in case you're joining us for the first time. And then we go deep into different set of demos and showcases from our community. We also have the opportunity to have some discussion today and Q&A coming from the people that are joining the call. So with that, I'm going to introduce the presenters today. Well, that's me on the first spot. Yina, I lead Microsoft Graph in engineering. I have Caitlin with me today, with an awesome engineer from our team working on the SDKs. And then we have 3 MVPs that are joining us, in addition to like all of the folks that have in the room, Paul, Mika, and Paolo, who are going to share some of the work that they've done building with the Microsoft Graph. With that, I'm going to go do a quick overview of Microsoft Graph. And for those of you who don't know, Microsoft Graph is the front door to all of the services that are behind Microsoft 365. So this is across Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Azure Active Directory, OneNote, Planner, Excel, many more services across the Intune and the security space as well, across Windows. So just think about it as, if it comes to customer data that Microsoft hosts within our services, Microsoft Graph is the gateway to access all of that data. And in addition to the data, it's also the gateway to access intelligence that we generate on our service based on the usage pattern of the users. So if as a developer, if you're building an application that interacts with the graph, you don't have to worry about where that data is stored. You just access graph.microsoft.com, and through path navigations, you get access to all of the different data from the different services. And this is data for the user, for the groups that are in the organization, and organizational level data. And in addition to that, because we have services across enterprise and consumer cloud, you can use Microsoft Graph to access data across consumer services and commercial services. Here I have a few samples of the type of request that you can make with the graph, but I'm actually going to jump to the browser and quickly show you our developer portal. So if you go to graph.microsoft.com, you'll see the developer portal for Microsoft Graph. You'll find all of the documentation, getting started experiences, and so forth. But I'm going to point you really quickly to the Graph Explorer. Graph Explorer is an app that we've built that allows you to interact with the API. So what it does is it makes the request and shows you the JSON response right there. You don't necessarily need to have an account in order to interact with the Graph Explorer, because we have a demo account on the back that you can use. So I can come here and just run simple queries and see the response coming from the API. So I made a request to the /me endpoint. /me is a token for /user and the ID of that logged in user. From here, I can do navigation to all of the different things that belong to a user. So for example, I can go to the messages, and I will see the messages that are in the user's mailbox. And then in order to see all of the different samples that we have on the Graph Explorer, you can come here to the Show More Samples link and see a different set of services that you can turn on and off for samples against the API. So this is a very quick way to get started and to see the API in action and learn about the different things that are exposed through the Microsoft Graph. Then after that, once you're ready to start coding, then you can come here to the quick starts and see, basically choose the platform of your choice and get an app in less than 3 minutes. So we do the app registration for you. There's a sample app already in there. We can package it, and you can get an app on the platform of your choice very quickly. Okay, with that, I'm going to come back to the deck and actually talked a little bit about this already. It's an HTTP-based API, so you can do all of these different things in order to interact with it. I'm going to jump into today's topic. We're going to start with Caitlin. For those who don't know, last week we released the preview of our Java SDK. This was long awaited from our community. We have been getting a lot of requests to release a Java version of our SDKs, and last week was that date. So thank you so much, Caitlin, and you can take it on.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so last week was really exciting for us. We were really excited to release our Java SDK out into the world. There were a lot of people asking for it. And so now it's available and we get to talk about it. So I'm Caitlin Bales. I'm an engineer on the Microsoft Graph tooling team. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the Java SDK does and then jump into a demo about some of the features that we have in the SDK. So a little bit about the motivation behind the SDK. So just as with our other SDKs, it enables developers to get started quickly. So it's removing all of that boilerplate HTTP request handling, all of the models, request builders. You don't have to write all that up from scratch. It's also a chance for us to get more involved in server-side scenarios. So, Graph itself is growing exponentially in terms of just sheer size. As more and more services get onboarded onto Graph, as well as the complexity of the scenarios that are coming on board. So as we get more entwined into different services and the complexity of the scenarios that we're developing, we're seeing that it makes more and more sense to have server-side applications that are servicing that result up to client-side applications, lightweight applications, whether that be web apps or Android applications, things like that. So previously we had a heavyweight Android application or Android SDK that would allow you to make applications, but we didn't have a server-side experience for that. And we thought it really made sense to allow our Java developers to have something on the server side that would allow them to offboard all of that heavyweight logic from their client-side applications. And the great thing about the Java SDK is that we didn't have to start from scratch. So whereas before we were developing these SDKs, we had an idea of what our customers wanted, and we started kind of iterating, prototyping on our experiences. We already had a lot of great customer feedback on our Android SDK. It's been out in the wild for about 2 years now. We had a lot of great feedback. We've got people using it. We've got issues. We've got bugs that we've fixed. And so we were able to take the experiences that we had already had in our public SDK and port those over to Java. We also had this great wish list of all these things we wanted to fix, make better, things that we had in other libraries such as .NET that we wanted to port over and make the experience better in our Java SDK. Also things that would be breaking the parity with Android that we couldn't change, such as just the breaking changes in the Android that, hey, we're starting over with a new library. What would we change if we could start over? Here was our chance to do that. So we really were able to start out of the gate with a amazing experience instead of having to start with something brand new. So that was really exciting for us. Some of the SDK features that we have for Java are strongly typed models, our request builder pattern. Again, so this is allowing you to use IntelliSense to kind of just type through building requests. So again, you're typing through, you can go .me, drive, items, build request, and then get, post, patch. All of that is coming through really naturally. It doesn't require you to be so tied into the docs. You can kind of work through the request pattern kind of naturally in the SDK. It's taking care of all the boilerplate logic. You don't need to write quite so much of that yourself. We try as much as possible to use smart defaults, so things like having the logger built in, having the serialization built in, but also allowing you to override those where it makes sense, so that if you want to have something more customized to your experience, or you have scenarios that want to override the HTTP defaults, such as setting custom request headers, we allow you to do that in the back end there. We also have a bunch of helper classes that we've written, so things specific to workloads. So for example, like Planner or OneNote might have very specific scenarios that take a lot for a developer to write the full scenario out. They might write something that makes it quick and easy to do with 1 or 2 lines of code. We also have things that are generic to graphs, so things such as paging through a collection or working with Delta query links. In the future, we want to expand that. We're looking at things like batching. Batching just went to V1. How do you batch in an SDK, making that really easy and intuitive to use? And then finally, with open source support, I mean, all of our SDKs are open source, but we think it's really important to us on the tooling team that, you know, all of the issues and PRs that we get, we work with the open source community. Java has a really rich open source community. And so, you know, working with them constantly and also pushing the people internally who are consumers of our SDKs to post all of those externally so that we have full visibility and everybody's working on the same issues and seeing the same results. So with that, we're going to actually jump in, look at the SDK a little bit, get a quick demo. The scenario here is we're an admin. We've got a bunch of people on our IT team. They've got OneDrive files that are all over the place. And they tend to go into OneDrive, try to find these files that they're looking for, but we want an easy place where they can find them all. So we're going to put them all into a OneNote programmatically by using some query filters to search for stuff in OneDrive, plop them into OneNote. We're going to be using multi-part messaging, which is traditionally kind of a tricky thing to get right, getting those requests sent. So we'll look at how the Java SDK makes that a little bit easier for us. So you'll see here we've got a blank notebook. This is just our default notebook for our IT group. So we've created a program notes section here, and this is where we're kind of going to insert all of our content. And then we've got a very simple console application called OneNote Sync. And all this is going to do is it's going to instantiate a graph client, and then we're going to put in all of that OneNote data from OneDrive. So the first thing we need to do is set up an authentication provider. As with any of our other SDKs, you really need to set that part up in order to actually access Graph. It's the only part of the Graph client that we can't instantiate by default. So I've got a little authenticator here. The best way to get plugged into this is to use the ADAL or MSOL libraries. But we have a really simple authentication scenario here, so we didn't really need something like that. We're using the client credential flow just because we're using a machine-to-machine authentication, so we don't really need a user present, so we're just going to go and get information about a group and not specific information about a user. So we've got down here, we've got our client ID and client secret, and we're going to use those with the grant type of client credential flow and just do a simple post request out to go get our access token. So all this whole authenticator is doing is getting us an access token that's valid, and then it's going to put this into a new authentication provider, which sets our authorization bearer access token header. Back in our client code, we've got a Graph client that we're going to instantiate, and we do that with our authentication provider that we've just created. And we build this from our configuration. So we've got a default client configuration, which makes it really easy. The only thing we need to set is our authentication provider. So everything else from the logger, the serializer, all of that information, we can create that from default and then build our client. And from here, now that we've got our Graph client, we can create anything based off of that. So if we go graph client dot, we can see all of those root level items are available as well. So you could go graph client dot me, dot users, dot groups. That's what we're going to be using. All of these are available right off the base level. So what we're going to be doing in this scenario is we're going to be getting a set of groups. We want to filter based on our IT group here, so we're going to be creating a new query option. And we can create query options by setting in a list to our request builder. So we're going to create a new request, graph client.groups, build our request with our filter option, and then just get the whole list of groups that are queried from that. And in this scenario, we're just going to assume the first one that we get back, that's our IT group. We can be more specific in there and search for a specific one, but I'm just going to guess that we only have one IT group. Next, we need to actually search for OneDrive links that match a specific query string. So in this scenario, we're going to search for all of our OneDrive links that have something relevant to mobile for us. So we have a helper method here that's going to search for relevant OneDrive links with the search term mobile. And this is going to look pretty similar to getting our IT group. So down here, we're going to create another query option. This one's going to search, and it's going to search for that search string of mobile. And then this time we're going to use that group ID, which is our IT group, and go to our drive root children and build our new request with our search option. And that'll return a list of OneDrive items, and then we can iterate through that as a collection of items until we've gotten every page of results. So we'll just keep going through those pages until we've gotten all of our items. And then for convenience, I've put them into a list with our the name of the link and then the actual web URL itself so that we can click on it and it has a display link to it. Now that we've gotten our links, we can transform those into an HTML list. So I won't show you that, just putting them into href links and making them look nice. And then we need to port them over into OneNote. So as we did before, we're going to query for our default notebook. So we're going to go to our group and get all of our available notebooks and then get the first one that we find. And similarly, to get our default section, we can go to the notebook ID that we just found and then get the first section in that notebook. And then finally, we'll get to the interesting part, which is to actually post this content that we just created in our OneDrive to our OneNote notebook. So this is the part where we're going to work with multi-part. So we have this object called multi-part, which is a helper function in the Java SDK that will allow you to post multi-part content. So we'll create a new multi-part object and we'll be able to post multi-part objects to it. The first multi-part object we're going to do is adding an HTML content to it. I've created this little HTML content string that we can post our content into. And then just to show what other kind of content objects you can add to it, I've added some items from the file system. So you could add image items to a multi-part, you can add file items to a multi-part. There's a lot of different kind of things you can do with it. So you can add the items down here. So once you've uploaded them, it will add them as an HTML part, as an image part, and as a file part. So as an image part and a file part, the only difference is that in an image part, you don't have to specify the content type. As a file part, you would specify this is an application PDF. And you just give it the object that you want to specify and the name of the object that it will be referenced as in the HTML content. And then finally, you'll want to add a header to your request that will specify the data for the multi-part. So the content type will need to be set to multi-part form data. By default, most of the data in the SDKs is set as application JSON. And then setting your boundaries. So multi-part uses boundaries to set between the different content parts. And the multi-part helper will take care of all of that by setting boundaries between each of the items, but you need to specify in the header what boundary you're using. And so you can get the value of that multi-part boundary here. And then finally, we'll actually post that multi-part content. So we'll call groups, OneNotes, that section that we want to post it to. We'll post our options header that we just created. And then when we call post, we'll put in multipart.content. And when we call multipart.content, it will actually create that full stream that's creating all those different chunks of content, including the HTML content, the images, and the PDF file. And then finally, that will post all the content. And then back up here, it'll finish running the program. So let's run it, and we can see how that works. We switch over to our notebook. We should be able to see it get posted in a second without having to refresh. So we'll see down here, recent content from OneNote, or sorry, from OneDrive. All these links here are links that it searched for on our OneDrive and it found has information relevant to mobile. It's also posted this image from our file system, and then finally it's got this PDF here, and all that information is posted through one multi-part request from the SDK. And with that, that is the end of the demo.
stuff. Thank you, Caitlin. Really awesome. So now we're going to go to the second part of the call for today, which is how developers are using Microsoft Graph. And then we are going to actually hand it over to 3 of our MVPs that are joining us today from Redmond. And let me see, I'm just want to make sure that I can present this one. So we're going to start with Paul. Paul, thank you so much, and you can take it over.
Thank you. My name is Paul Schäflein, and I'm here to talk to you today about a software that I helped move to the cloud for Sperry Software 365. This is a company that has COM add-ins for Outlook for Windows, a couple dozen of them, and obviously as their customers are moving to Office 365 in the cloud, they want to go with them. And as well as Outlook is now available on non-Windows platforms, so they certainly want to be able to provide their services for those. And so what we started with is because we're in the cloud, we want to do a web-based architecture, and I wanted to put the slide in here because I think it's representative of what most people will need to think about as they're moving to the cloud and using the graph. And so we have a web application that we're using to log in with Azure Active Directory. This gives us the ability to customize, to personalize this. We know who the user is, gives us a vehicle for us to then make sure that they can consent to the permissions that we want to do on their behalf. And then we separated out our token cache. This is an important thing that people have to understand. We want to do some work on users' behalf, so in order to do that, we need a token. So we extract that out and making sure that we can get that data easily, as you'll see. On the right-hand side, you'll see we have some Azure functions. And again, this is another common pattern that I think most people find helpful, in that we can use functions for low-cost, lightweight processing of what's going on. In this particular example, this add-on sends an email on a schedule. So a user can log in, type in an email, attach a document, say I want this to go out every Monday morning, for example. And so we have a background process that will then, at that schedule, wake up and send the email. And again, this is where the power of the graph comes in, because we've cached their token. We can make a single call to graph to get information about who the user that we're sending the message for, grab their information and send it out through email. And one thing I want to point out is that we found very helpful is it started out as just a simple, we want to send an email. But as we got into the graph, it became quite obvious. Well, now we can offer the ability to say, would you like to attach a file that's in a SharePoint library? Because once I have the token acquisition code, it's easy enough to have /me/drive in addition to /me/sendmail. And it opens up all kinds of possibilities now for interacting with the entire organization. Perhaps this message can be sent from a group or to a group, or we can update calendars. And so what this customer's found is, number one, there was a specific need because customers were moving to the cloud. But once we got there, just using the graph opens up all types of possibilities for enhancements and future products.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. We're going to go to a second showcase with Mika from Puzzleport.
Thank you. So my name is Mikael Svensson. So we do a lot of configuration of groups these days. So that means we lock down the out-of-the-box Office 365 group provisioning and do our own, and that's where the graph comes in. You can just go to the next slide. So the idea is that out of the box, that means everyone can create groups, but it quickly becomes very cluttered because you have little control of the naming. Well, you can do one pattern, and it doesn't really suit most of the customers, at least the ones we look at. So you have sort of one group to rule them all. We want more control. That means everyone can still create groups, but we have our own, we'll use a SharePoint list right now, where you can have to enter more parameters, you can have a secondary owner. We want to have different logos by default on the groups. We might or might not want to enable teams by default. Different business requirements, basically, to set in. So that's where the graph comes in. So I'll share my screen. Share my desktop. Let's see if it's loading. And there we are. So to do this, we have, so we're using an ADAL app. The reason why we use an ADAL app and not an MSAL app is because we also want to do SharePoint configuration. So we need a certificate to do SharePoint. So we just want to have everything in one application. So if you see on my right-hand side here, I have a lot of Azure functions, which actually do the heavy lifting. I have a function to create a group, add members, add an owner, get the site URL, I can renew lifecycle policies, do you want to have external access, etc. So all these Azure functions actually go into a flow. So let me show the flow. So if I edit this flow. So the idea is to create small chunks of functions to do a small piece of configuration. So this is a trigger in flow where you order the site, and then there's some variables. In this particular case, we have an approval as well. I mean, if you create a private group, you need to have it approved because we want all the groups to actually be public, to have more content visible. So you need a really good reason to actually have it private. And then if you look at the right-hand side here, that's all the graph functions going. And then on the left hand, it's configuration of the SharePoint side. So those will happen in parallel. So what I'll actually try to do is I'll create a new or order a new group. You can just see this going. So let's call this graph call demo, and I'll put myself as a contact. And let's make this external and public. And click save. And that triggered the flow right away. So now it's actually started. It's waiting. For some reason, the approval step, even though we don't do approval, takes a few seconds to go through. I don't know why. So now we're up to 17 seconds. Let's see. So the group should be updated fairly quickly. Yep, now the group is created. And it moves down on the right-hand side. And we will, so now we have the owner, the members, and we set some custom metadata as well. So that means if I go back to my group listing page, the group should actually show, but it's not, so here it is, but it's not configured yet on the SharePoint side. One of the issues we had was some of the functions like enabling a team or uploading a logo. We can't do that with app-only tokens, so we could have used a service user. Either you would then have to be a tenant admin to just modify anything, or a user admin, or you would have to add that service user as an owner to the group. So what we decided to do is actually create a couple of SharePoint framework extensions which is hooked into the site. So what happens is when the SharePoint site is done, it will actually add a custom action to the site, and it will send an email to the user, say, well, to get ready, you need to click this link, and it will take you to the site, and I will actually upload the logo. So if I go, so this is the code. I'll just wait for that to switch. So this is the upload logo customizer, where we have the graph call right here. So basically what we do is I fetch a logo from a default library SharePoint, and then I upload it in the user context. And then once this has run, it will remove the customizer right here. So it's sort of like a run once pattern. So we decided to do all the user actions on the SharePoint side because that's easier. I guess now with the new graph permissions in SharePoint Framework coming, we could actually pass in the token on the order and create a custom order application instead, and we could actually create everything in the user's context instead. So that's something we're looking into right now. So if I just let's go to the site I created. Let's see how much. I'm not sure how far it's actually done. Let's see. No. See, it's still waiting for the site to be actually ready. Oh, no, it moved quickly down here. So now it's adding an external disclaimer. So that's also an extension which will show if you allow external people or not. So that means if I refresh here right now, we should possibly, yep, this site allows sharing with external users. So you see, I now have pink, but once the steps go further, we'll set the branding. So this should now be, I think, green, and then the logo will be updated as well. So yeah, just need to let the flow run. That's it.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Mika. Can you project the next slide, please?
I don't think I have it.
Okay, so
I'll stop sharing.
I'll share back on my desktop. Let's start from here so that folks can look at the blog post that you've published, Nika, on this particular scenario that you were just describing.
Yeah, I've touched some of the different, some of the extensions are there, so I touched some of it. Some ideas to release all of this as a sample, but it takes a little bit of packaging because there's a lot of moving parts with the NLApp and certificates and all the flow parts. So, but I'm getting there.
Awesome. Thank you, Mika. Okay, now we're going to go to Paolo. Paolo, thank you for joining the call today.
Thank you, Ina. Yes, I will cover a use case which is not so far from the one covered by Michael in a slightly different context because it's a business scenario in which the customer, we can go to the next slide, thank you, or good, thank you. The customer want to create a team in Microsoft Teams for every single new machine they produce, the producer of machines. And there are some specific requirements, like, for example, being able to have all of the people working on the new machine project to share documents, information, planner around the new project. But they also want to have control on the teams created. They want to have some application accounts, which will be owners of the Microsoft Teams that will be created. And they want to do custom provisioning of artifacts in the modern team site backing the Microsoft team. So we decided to use a solution. If we can go to the next one as well. We decided to create a solution which is an Azure AD application. So an application registered in Azure AD based on ASP.NET MVC web app, because we need to grab the access token of the current user in order to being able to create a Microsoft team on behalf of the user using a delegated access token. We use a blob storage queue in which we store all the information about the team that has to be created, and using the blob storage queue, we can have an asynchronous pattern. So thanks to the blob storage queue, we also have a retry logic inside the blob storage queue. In fact, in case of any failure of the execution of our process, the message will go back to the queue and will be processed again later on. And we process the messages in the queue using an Azure function. The Azure function, we use the Microsoft Graph to create one item in a SharePoint list using the v1.0, so the RTM version of the graph, targeting SharePoint Online, as well as the beta endpoint right now to create a team, or better, to upgrade a group into a team, because that's what we have right now in the beta endpoint of the graph. I can briefly show you a proof of concept of the solution because I cannot share the real customer solution here. So let me switch to my screen. I will share my desktop just for a while. And let's see when it will show up. So I will start showing you the, let me see if it is popping up. Not yet. Okay, it is coming. So this is just an excerpt of the code of the ASP.NET MVC application. As I told you, we need to grab the access token of the current user, and we will put the access token of the user inside the message that will be stored in the blob storage queue, so that in the Azure function in the backend, we will be able to interact with the Microsoft Graph using the access token of the currently connected user. That's a kind of a workaround to be able to create the team in a background process, even if we are not in the real users context. And because we can't do that as an app-only request, we need to have the user delegated token. Then we simply configure some information about the group that we want to create and the team that we want to create. And using the Azure storage libraries, we simply create a new message in a blob storage queue that we store and that we will pick up from an Azure function, which will do the real magic. So it will use the Microsoft Graph. As you can see, it is a PowerShell-based Azure function. So we make some invoke web requests from PowerShell, targeting the graph to create the new group. For example, here we make a post request to the collection of groups to create a new group, and the new group will be a JSON message like this one. Moreover, we can add custom owners to the group using still using the graph. And so we will get the specific user that we want to add. We will get the ID, the unique ID of the user from an Azure AD perspective, and we will use the ID to add the user as a new owner in the collection, the reference collection of the owners in the current group. Once we have done with that, we use the v1.0 endpoint of the graph to create a new item in a SharePoint online list, just to keep track of the created items. And later on, using the beta endpoint of the graph, we also create a team. In fact, here we are on the beta version of the graph. We target the group that we created, and by using this /team action with a put request, HTTP request, we can upgrade the group into a team. That's the overall idea of the solution. If we can switch back to the slide deck, or I can even do that if you like. I can.
We just set my desktop again.
Okay. 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 The challenges and the key learnings of this solution are the following. And sorry, Yina, it's an animated slide, so I will make you work a lot. Of course, as I said, we use the beta endpoint of the graph, and we use that one to upgrade the group into a team. And as a kind of a feedback for you as the team of the product group of Graph, it would be really great to have an endpoint to just create a team without the need to create a group and then upgrade it to a team. Most likely you're really working on it.
Backlog is coming.
I love you guys. I love you. And moreover, we would like to be able to do that with an app-only token and not only with a delegated token. And it's in the
Also in the backlog and coming.
Wonderful, amazing. And we are using an Azure AD application and an ASP.NVC application with ADIL exactly because we need to grab the access token of the user and to pass the access token to the backend infrastructure. As soon as we will be able to do that with an app-only token, we will not need any more this workaround. Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. And we use the blob storage queue because I think having a synchronous pattern is a good behavior rather than doing things in kind of real time, because if in case of any failure, I think a blob queue in the middle is better, in my opinion. And there is a retry logic which is included in the offering of the blob storage queue. And moreover, using a blob storage queue, which is encrypted, we can protect the access token of the user, which is, of course, really important. Last but not least, keep in mind that in a real solution, whenever you create a group and you want to upgrade the group into a team, it will take a while, between 5 and 10 minutes at least. So you should provide a retry logic also for the team creation or the team upgrade, because most likely you will not be able to upgrade a group into a team as soon as the group has been created. So this is just a thing that is useful to know. And that's it on my side too, so thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, so we saw 3 different showcases of what MVPs are doing with the graph, different solutions that they've built for their customers. I want to also highlight today a set of community contributions over the last month that we've received from our MVP community. The list is here, is quite extensive. We have new courses being created, like the course that Sahil created, new blog posts, new different set of, folks going out into the community and doing presentations. Like, just last week, Sebastian was on Branson giving some presentations, Gavin as well. So thank you so much for all of the work that you guys are doing and for all of the different contributions. Reach out to us to let us know when these things are happening so that we can showcase you again and, amplify the message that you're already amplifying with us. Also, the recording for this session is going to be available on our YouTube channel. Our next call is going to be on April 3rd. You can submit your questions beforehand and add the invite to your calendar using the links in the slide.
Yeah, so let me just jump in and say a couple more things since this is the first time we've done this live and I have all you guys here. So I'm Ben Summers, I'm from the marketing team, and we're actually building a whole series of these community calls. So while Graph happens monthly, we're having a Teams call every quarter, and that's usually with, really the best Teams people we can find. In fact, all these calls we're having Active Directory calls on a regular basis. The Word, Excel, PowerPoint guys are doing quarterly calls. So this is a rhythm that we're trying to build across all the different office engineering teams and accessibility teams. So any of these areas that you're interested in, please help us not only drive attendance, but help us retweet these things so that we can spread the good word. I just want to make sure that everybody knows this is something that we're really trying to commit to building a huge community around, so we want your help.
And with that, I'm also going to mention that this week, we're going to start making calls office hours for identity.
Right.
So, we have our resident, expert on identity, Victoria Bertoschi, who is going to lead those calls. And the first one is March 8th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So, you're all welcome to join. And if you have questions, I know identity and auth are hot areas. So, just join the call, bring in your questions. It's office hours type of style, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Watch. So if you go to dev.office.com, we're posting these as events. We're also posting tweets periodically. So there's a regular tweet cadence that we have set up. So if you watch the Office Dev Twitter feed, you'll see links to all of the calls. You can retweet them. They always have a sort of a standard image with a faded picture, blah, 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 color coded based on the kind of event it will be. So it's green for Excel, it's blue for PowerPoint, et cetera, right? So, or SharePoint, I should say. So we do try to give you guys cues in the feed. We give you the links, we give you the dates, times, and then we also repost the content of the call or links to that content after the call's taken place. So this should probably appear within 24 to 48 hours on our Twitter feed. Please help us, retweet and spread that word.
Great. With that, we're going to jump into the Q&A portion of the call. We have a lot of folks here in the room, so I'm just going to open up and start with them. If there's questions that you guys have in mind, and also remember that we are on a regular basis on Stack Overflow. So if you post questions there with the tag Microsoft Graph, all of our engineering teams are constantly monitoring the forums and providing questions there. So just going to open up for folks in the room. Any comments or questions that you guys have for today?
I've got a question around the Teams APIs that are in beta at the moment. Can you share any rough timeline of when they might go GA?
So we usually don't make compromises on timelines for GA because things might happen on the engineering side, right? But we are actively working on the Teams APIs. The APIs that we have in place today cover basic scenarios, and we're going deeper on the scenarios. We're adding support for app only, support for multiple scenarios around the Teams provisioning, around cloning groups, around being able to access all of the different channels and conversations. And we usually have big moments around our conference timelines. I can't commit to that, but there's a good chance.